are local landmarks a mile apart. One goal was generally all it took to win the game, although that could take a whole day. In Kirkwall, two sides compete, the up the gates and the down the gates. Their struggle for the ball, or bar, is deeply symbolic.
The tradition was for a long time that if the down the gates managed to get the bar, which was the fertilizing influence of the sun, it was the sun and its fertilizing influence, and they threw it into the waters of the harbour, then that would bring good fishing. And if the up the gates got the bar to their goal, and they were mostly farmers, that would bring good crops, particularly good potatoes. And there was a small town in Norway that until recently phoned every New Year's Day to see which way the bar had gone, so they could assess whether or not there was going to be good fishing in the months ahead. In terms of roughness, there are no rules. It's hard. It's a hard physical contest. Perhaps sometimes old scores are settled, but generally speaking, there is little gratuitous violence.
For all its rough and tumble, folk football was more often than not folklore. Not so for the Calcio Historica played in Florence, Italy. Here was a game which directly acknowledged its debt to the ancient Roman game of harpasto.
Questo gioco, tanto in uso fra i legionari romani, fu introdotto anche nella colonia florenzia. Con l'andar del tempo i fiorentini se ne appropriarono.
Calcio's history is as rich in antiquity as any of the English folk games. Florentines proudly recall the legend of the sedio, an infamous match played in defiance of its enemies.
Nel 1530 i fiorentini erano assediati dalle truppe imperiali di Carlo V e per non interrompere l'usanza di carnevale, di giocare per carnevale, il 17 febbraio giocarono una partita a scherno degli assedianti che ormai credevano Firenze soccombente.
Such bravado typifies a game infused with violence. A game where men test themselves and master both their fear and their opponent. In the sedio of 1530, one player became the embodiment of these virtues, Dante da Castiglione.
Una regola fondamentale era quella che la palla doveva essere sempre in movimento. Il morticino degli antinori non mollava il pallone, lo teneva con sé. E per il forte Dante da Castiglione prese calciante e pallone, che non era fermo perché era in movimento in quanto lo teneva in braccio, e portò fino alla rete avversaria e scagliò dentro calciante e pallone, marcando la caccia.
Calcio was a game adored by all Florentines, yet it was also riven with distinctions of class and social standing.
Mentre i nobili lo giocavano nelle maggiori piazze con intensa partecipazione di pubblico, viceversa il popolo si intratteneva a questo ludo proprio in considerazione che era il loro gioco e veniva praticato da tutte le parti, tant'è che girando per le strade di Firenze si può ancora vedere su palazzi o vicino alle chiese delle targhe di marmo o di pietra dove i signori Otto di Guardia e Balia proibivano di giocare appunto vicino alle chiese oppure per le strade a questo gioco spontaneo che tutti i fiorentini giocavano.
Restrictions such as these were commonplace in Britain. Shops and homes were regularly damaged as the players rampaged through towns. Many died from their wounds.
You can almost write the history of the game, folk game of football, in terms of people trying to stop it, of local authority issuing edicts, the royals issuing proclamations against it, colleges trying to stop their members playing it, because it's turbulent, because it's violent, because it poses a threat to law and order on that particular day when the games take place.
As early as 1314, King Edward II banned football in London, proclaiming, "Forasmuch as there is a great noise in the city, caused by hustling over large balls, from which many evils might arise, which, God forbid, we commend and forbid such a game to be used in the city in future." Edward's descendants were equally dismissive. Henry V waged war against it, as did Henry VIII, who believed it was distracting young men from their archery. Yet neither could stop football being played. And when, in the 19th century, football finally received a fatal blow, it was not an act of man, but of machinery.
The threat that folk football posed to the rise of an urban society in the early 19th century was serious in a way. You can't have the old games that have been played in a kind of pre-industrial environment played in the great expanding urban industrial centres. Local towns and cities pass acts and pieces of legislation to curb the old traditional games from being played in their own towns and on their streets. This is a world where football has to find a new location to be played. The old folk game is dead.
The game was rescued from oblivion by the public schools of England, who were in turn endeavouring to save themselves. In the 1850s, most were struggling with falling admissions and violent pupils. Students rioted, burnt down classrooms, and attacked locals. The teachers, many of them vicars, were horrified.
Given the mentalities of pupils at the time, and given their lack of personal self-control, that frame of mind had to be changed. And so emerged as a form of social control the process of turning hooligans into heroes. And the essence of reform was the playing field. And the rationale behind this was very simple. If you beat hell out of each other on the games field, you weren't quite so predisposed to beating hell out of the villagers or the local inhabitants.
Religion became the backbone of this sporting revolution. Muscular Christianity, the belief that sports were a useful aspect of religious training, taught boys that a fit body bred a fit mind, that fair play and teamwork on the playing field promoted moral fortitude. Each school evolved its own version of football. Some, like Harrow, favoured a kicking game, while others, such as Rugby School, were allowed to handle, run, and hack down opponents. This rich diversity was to become the starting point for the modern game.
I think the public school teams firstly kept the games going, and then probably the real significance is at the moments at which public school boys went to university together, or when they left school, left university, and wanted to carry on playing the games, and therefore needed an agreed form of the games to play, and that's what leads us into the codification of football.
On the 26th of October 1863, 11 London clubs met at the Freemasons Tavern to discuss